felt like she's got any older.
Yeah.
5 years or so she started doing it. So something caught my eye in the Haftarah over Shabbos. So I just wanted to share an idea. I think I say this very often. The Haftarahs are potentially undersold. Sometimes they are. We ought to probably spend much time on the Haftarah as the parsha. And the Haftarah from the Shabbos is an example. It's the story of us. Um, it's the story of Yiftach, the Yiftach, the shofet, Yiftach, the judge. How do you say it in English? How do you say it in English? Okay, we'll stick with Yiftach. And just is not so straightforward. So Shoftim is the period of time between the death of Joshua. You've then got a 400 or so year period before the story of Shmuel Hanavi and then Malach. And you've got this transitionary period of judges, some of which were sort of there for a very long time and very stable. Some whose tenure is slightly shorter. Lots of very interesting and fascinating and difficult characters to come across, and Yiftach is one of those. So Yiftach, I'm going to come back to the beginning of this story later. So the story is that the Jewish people at the time, they have lots of trouble from the neighbors. Nothing changes. The neighbors change, but the trouble doesn't change. So at that particular time, they were in trouble against Ammon and Moab, and that's probably the direct connection to the parasha. But why that should be important is for a different time. But Ammon and Moab, who were the two nations who caused trouble in Chukas and later in Parshas Balak. The wars at the end of Parshas Chukas were against those two nations, so they're causing problems. Yiftach, almost out of nowhere, becomes the leader. He's very inspired, and he sort of walks with the spirit of God and is able to successfully wage war against Ammon and Moab. The end of the story is very famous, which is, anyone remember what's the end of the story of Yiftach? Sorry? Why does he send his daughter away?
He says the first thing that comes out of his house he will sacrifice, and it's his daughter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Armin. So the first thing that comes out of his door, so just before the war, he says the first thing that comes out of the door, I'm going to sacrifice. And lo and behold, it's his daughter. The Gemara says the reason why he was called Yiftach, the word Yiftach in Hebrew means to open up, and the Gemara says is that he should have found an opening for his vow at that particular time. So the Haftarah conveniently, sometimes it's funny, is if you look at the Haftarahs, they sometimes stop just before the good bit. So we don't actually, the Haftarah finishes after the vow. We don't actually find out what happens to his daughter in the Haftarah. You have to read forward for that. So he makes the vow, daughter comes out. The Haftarah finishes after the vow, and then straight after the Haftarah finishes, we read about how his daughter comes out. And then obviously Yiftach is distraught. She doesn't annul the vow. And the end of the story is that she goes and she's taken away. Her friends come and warn her. It doesn't actually say what happens. It does say what happens. It says that it just says he carried out the vow with her. It's unclear what exactly happened to her. Whether she was actually sacrificed or whether she was just disappeared or just sort of kept in a nunnery or whatever the equivalent of that time, the Jewish equivalent of that time was. Quite tragically, it says that the section finishes with the fact that Mayimim Yamima, from day to day, the daughters of of Israel would go out to mourn for the daughter of Yiftach 4 times in the year, 4 days in the year. So that's the conclusion of that section. And again, doesn't necessarily, it leaves it open as to whether she's alive or dead at that particular time. There's someone else who has that, yeah. they wouldn't have allowed it, but yes. However, um, part of the problem with reading or the challenge of learning the Book of Shoftim is the fact that you have very inspired leaders who did great things, but also it doesn't hide away from their flaws as well. So just because he said it shouldn't have been done, there's lots of things he should have done. And that's one of the realities we have to deal with. That Tanakh presents us with the leaders and their inspirations, but at the same time, doesn't hide away from challenges. There's someone else as well who also has this, their end is hidden. Very similar story. More famous woman who's has a decree imposed upon her. Vashti. Vashti is she's Ahasuerus says declares her that she has to be processed. Chazal take on the fact that she was executed, but the story doesn't actually say what happens to her. It just kind of leaves her there. There's a lot. I think there's a midrash. I need to find it, but the midrash says that there's another reference to 4 times a year. So it says the daughters of Israel would go out to more than 4 times a year. So we have the 4 fast days in the year. So the morning days of fasting. So the fast of Gedalia, Pentatevus, and then Shabbat B'Tammuz, and then Tisha B'Av. So those are the 4 fast days to do with the morning of Beis Hamikdash per se, as opposed to Yom Kippur, which is its own thing, and Fast Sylvester, which is so there's a midrash that says that the 4 days that the daughters of Israel mourned for Yiftach's daughter became the 4 fast days mourning for the temple. So that's the end of the story. It's very well known. It's absolutely tragic. There's much to read into this. But what caught my eye in particular this year, and again, just I wanted to show you over here, is really the beginning of the story. So again, just there's so much to discuss over here. I don't have time to do it now, but Yiftach's inception was fascinating. So as it begins, Yiftach was Yiftach the Giladi was a mighty warrior, a man of valor. Vahu ben Ish Zona. He was the Ben Isha Zona. Sorry, he was the daughter of a harlot, a prostitute, a woman who had an affair. There's different ways of interpreting it. Sorry. Yeah, that's more. There's more to say about Rachov than over here. So no, our Scots translation. He was the son of a strange woman. Gilad was his father. The woman then had other children with Gilad, and this is the bit that I wanted to pick up on. For Yigdal B'nei Isha, the other sons of the woman grew up. The Garshu as Yiftach, they drove out. They drove out Yiftach, and they said that you're not going to have any inheritance for the house of our father because you're the daughter of another woman. Yiftach was driven away from his brothers, and then Yiftach was driven away from his brothers. For Yeshiv Eretz Tov, he went to live in the land of Tov, or a good land. For Yislaktu es Yiftach Anoshim Rekim, Yiftach gathered around him empty men. What that means again, there's much to say there. The Yetsu Imo, and they went out with him. And then the next thing is that there was, after days, he then starts to wage war on behalf of the men of Gilad and becomes the leader. What struck me about the beginning of the story is that Yiftach grew up in this strange house, and then you've got this emphasis over here is that the other sons never accepted him because of who his mother was, and they drove him out of the house. So Yiftach's inception was that he was driven out from his home, right? So the end of the story, right? Flip to the end of the story. He's about to wage battle, and he makes a similar promise, which is that whatever comes out of my house first is going to be sanctified to God, right? Now, and the beginning of the end of the story completely struck me over that, especially in the Haftarah, because the Haftarah doesn't tell us what comment came out of his door. We learn that in the next pasuk. So my thoughts were as follows: is that Yiftach grew up with this, this was his inception story. He was driven out of his house. Eventually they needed him. And then he became this wondrous, inspired leader. God spoke to him, waged wars on behalf of Israel, saved the whole nation. right? And his story is that I was driven from my house. So his way of kind of almost solving the problem is that whatever comes out of my house is going to be holy, right? But he was wrong, right? He was wrong. Okay, and I think this is a kind of the emphasis because what he made this declaration, okay, and I think that and it led him to great troubles. He was right, but he was wrong. He was right in the fact that he was driven from his house, and like he came out of nowhere. He gathered around himself these empty men, and he really found himself a place in Israel. God spoke to him, he saved everyone, right? He came from nothing, and he took that with him wherever he went. Right, but the solution to that isn't right. The solution to that is to acknowledge that beginning, to own it, to make it a part of yourself, right? And he did that in the most wondrous way. That doesn't mean that whatever comes out of your house will automatically be holiest in the holy sense. And I just think that the beginning of the story and the end of the story, and I haven't fully sort of fleshed this out, but the idea that Yiftach wanted to almost kind of like reverse his beginnings, right? That I was driven out of my house and I became this super holy person. I became this warrior, and his solution was to try and declare whatever comes out of his door first to be holy. Yeah, Yiftach he made a mistake. He was impetuous. He didn't think things through. He said the first thing that came out of his mouth. And that's perhaps the connection to the parsha. The parsha is that Moshe said something improper at the improper time, right? And I think that was the same thing with Yiftach. Yiftach declared something. Judaism definitely believes, and I think this is massive. Everyone has a chilek, everyone has a portion, and everyone can do absolutely amazing things. The Mishnah says is that Mamza Tamachochem come in the Kohen Gadol. Got someone who is a Mamza who's a Tamachochem. He takes priority over the Kohen Gadol who doesn't know everything. It's painful, but we acknowledge that there are that people come from different places. That's really really painful. But at the same time, the opportunities are afforded to absolutely everyone. And Yiftach really was the one who lived that. He became the warrior. He became the one who's connected to God. Doesn't mean that can be done on the right in the same way for everyone. And I think that was his mistake potentially at the end. Again, feel free to disagree with me. And I think this is just my first thoughts on what's a really fascinating and very difficult story. And again, as I always finish my sharing, this is just the I think this is just the opening. Yiftach, it's the opening to the story to the study rather than the beginning. I'm just going to leave those thoughts with you. Again, feel free to sort of offer a different interpretation to sort of the beginning and end of that story.
First thing likely to come through your door, or a dog, which wouldn't be acceptable.
It's certainly a rash thing to say on what this is intention. Again, there's maybe he just had loads of cows and was accepted. Or why he did it. Bit of a dodgy thing to do.
Right, okay. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I will say goodbye to those on Zoom. Remember, there's no share next week. Those on Zoom. Next week is Pastor Tavis, so I don't think we're Pastor Thomas even. Yeah, I'm fast forwarding Pastor Thomas. So so we can't really have any food. Okay, so we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.